Today is Wednesday. It is Wednesday, March 16th, and you should be reading Numbers chapter 34, 35, 36, and Luke chapter 4. I hope you've been encouraged through the book of Numbers as we've been following the journey of the Israelite people on their way to the promised land. I actually want to skip to the end of your story today. It's the end of Numbers chapter 36. Before this point, you would have read that God was helping them finalize the lands of their people, right? They're going to be, when they inhabit the land of Canaan, and it's going to become the land of Israel, here's where they're going to stay. Here's their boundaries. How are things going to unfold? And then this is how the book of Numbers ends. It says, all these chapters we've been reading the last couple weeks, these are the commands and regulations the Lord gave through Moses to the Israelites on the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. You see, the Israelites haven't entered into their promised land yet. Remember, there were consequences. We talked about it, I think, last week, that Joshua and Caleb went in to spy with 10 other guys because 10 were bad and 2 were good, right? They went in to spy the promised land. They said, there's too many giants there. We can't go. And instead of trusting God for their deliverance like he had done in Egypt, they cowered in fear. And then there was consequences to them not trusting God. And the consequences were they would wander the desert for 40 years. They would wander all the way around. If this is the promised land, they would wander all the way around the promised land, but not be able to enter it until this generation who had rejected God and distrusted God had died. And now they're on this side of the Jordan. If the Jordan River runs down the middle geographically, right? If you're looking at a map, you will notice that Israel's here, the Mediterranean Sea is over here, you have Egypt down here, and over here is the land of Moab, and right down the middle is the Jordan River, and they're camped here, getting ready to cross over to Jericho. That old generation had died off, the generation that had distrusted God, even though they saw the promises of God, distrusted God and his deliverance, and now a new generation was rising up. Joshua would be taking over from Moses. We talked about that the last couple of days, the handing off of the baton from Moses to Joshua. And God reminded them of his commands. And before we jump in tomorrow to Deuteronomy, I want to remind you that we're going to be repeating a lot of things. I want to warn you it's going to happen. And the reason is not because the Bible just wants to be repetitive, but it's been 40 years. It's been 40 years since they heard God's promises the first time. It's a new generation, and they're about to enter into the promised land, and God doesn't want them to forget what he said, and so he's reminding them, before you enter into this land, before you go to battle, before you do these things, this is who you are, this is who I am as your God, and this is what I expect of you. And I love this. At the end of chapter 36, to close it out, God finished the commands and regulations of Numbers. There's going to be more in Deuteronomy. Of Numbers, though, before they prepared to cross the Jordan into Jericho. So they're camped out on this side of the Jordan, a few miles away from Jericho. Jericho has to be seeing what's going on. These multitude of people, right? Which plays into the book of Joshua later when they actually get to march on Jericho. They're watching. Jericho is watching this nation across the river from them camp, and they have to be wondering what's going to happen. There's a tension there. And I love that. In this chapter, God is reminding them of who he is, what he's done for them, and setting up for what's going to come in Deuteronomy. And I just want to take a moment to say the reason why I like this stuff. The reason why it's so good, this stuff, is it's a good reminder that, you know what, sometimes we as God's people, we see the promises and deliverance of God, just like this generation's parents did, and we still distrust God. Book of Numbers at 36 is a sad chapter to me, because it's not a chapter celebrating what the generation who saw God's deliverance through the Red Sea, who saw God give them things from a mountaintop, commandments, right, of how to live, who heard the voice of God thunder from the mountaintop. That generation saw all those things and still didn't trust God. It's a good reminder for you and for me that when God is at work in us and through us to do mighty things, we don't want to be like that generation. That generation saw the mighty hand of God unfold and do miraculous things in their midst. They had the pillar of fire by night. They had the cloud by day. They had manna from heaven and quail from heaven. They had water from a rock. That generation. And still didn't trust the promises of God. Church, God's going to do mighty things through us when we surrender to his will, when we surrender to his plan. He's going to do awesome things through us and in us. And I don't want to, and I don't want you to be like that generation who saw all the things but didn't get to enter into the promised land because we still didn't trust God. The takeaway from the end of Numbers is don't be like that first generation. Do something different. Be different from them. See the promises of God and rejoice in the promises of God. Then trust God to do the impossible in the next seasons he calls us into. When he says to go do this, instead of saying, oh no, there are giants in the land, but God delivered us before, but there are giants now. Say, he did it before, so he'll do it again. We're going to trust our God to help us walk through what's next. It's one of our core values as a church. Next. We're not done yet. God is calling us into a next season to do awesome things for him, and we don't want to miss out on it. Church, I look forward to talking to you tomorrow about the book of Deuteronomy. Until we see you, though, you are sent.